Welcome to Rowdy and Real with me, Sophie Shaw, therapist and slight loose cannon. I'll be sharing some life lessons and wisdom from the real world. If nothing else, it'll take your mind off your problems for a bit. And if we're really lucky, you might even hear something that helps you to make it better. So stick around for real talk, real growth, and some probable bad language. Let's dive in, shall we? Hello, my love. Welcome to another episode. Today's episode is for you if you are considering starting any kind of self-work, or if you have already started some kind of self-work and maybe you've hit a roadblock. And I just want to say it takes an enormous amount of courage to get onto your healing path. You know, to challenge the status quo and to say, no, bollocks, I'm sick of this. I want something to change. It's so much easier to stay where you are, even if where you are is not really what you want. We are very good at putting up with stuff for a long period of time because making change is difficult. We don't like change and we don't like to challenge the status quo. So if you have begun some kind of self-work, or if you're even just considering it and tuning in today to see what that might look like, then kudos to you. Bravo, seriously. You know, I applaud you from my little cupboard because I think this is the most important thing that you can do, is to work on yourself so that you can be the best human that you can be to help heal this world. Wow, that was a bit heavy for the beginning of a podcast. No pressure. You could just do this because it might be interesting and fun and make you feel better. That's as lofty as your goal needs to be, and that's totally fine. So the thing is, you know, when you start working on your issues and you have a bit of an emotional setback, it can almost be more bewildering, more discouraging to have that happen when you've, you know, started working on your stuff. You would think that you'd start to feel better, but it isn't always that simple. So if this has happened to you, if you've embarked on some kind of journey and you've had a bit of a setback, I just want you to know it's totally normal. It's not your fault. And I'd like to explain a little bit about what might be happening. You may have heard the phrase, healing isn't linear, and you probably have a decent sense of what is meant by that. In other words, there's going to be ups and downs. But I just don't think you really appreciate it until you actually start doing the work and then experience those ups and downs for yourself. So when you do start to work on yourself, you probably feel pretty good at first. And that's probably because, depending on the method that you have chosen to do your self-work, whether that's counseling or therapy or hypnotherapy or Reiki healing or journaling or any kind of method, you probably feel good because at the beginning you've had a space to unburden yourself. And you begin to, you know, have some early insights. And of course, that light of understanding, it does make things so much clearer and so much easier to bear because they make sense suddenly. But then something odd happens sometimes, and it can feel like you've kind of gone backwards. It's almost as if, you know, some of your symptoms might feel worse. You might feel more emotional or more churned up or even a little bit more anxious at first. And far from making progress, you might even feel that you've made things worse. Now, I can absolutely promise you, this is never the case. Self-work, self-exploration, self-development, whatever you want to call it, it's always a positive idea. It's always a healing idea. It's just, you know, messy. And sometimes you feel that early kind of churned up, more emotional feeling because you've reached that uncomfortable bit of therapy where you've delved a bit deeper and you've brought some of your stuff out of the shadows and into the light. In healing terms, I always refer to this as issues coming up and out to be healed. And there are other more disgusting analogies like, you know, squeezing a spot or, you know, getting unconstipated and finally going to the loo. You know, these are anatomical sort of analogies, but they can kind of reflect the process because your unwanted stuff that was stuck inside you has finally had a passageway out. And it's uncomfortable, but it's always for your highest good, even if it's unpleasant to experience sometimes. It's a bit like if you've ever given up caffeine. I'm not a caffeine drinker personally because I like sleeping. But if you've ever given up caffeine, then a lot of people tell me that you get this awful banging headache at first. So, you could be forgiven for thinking that giving up caffeine is a bad thing. But if you stick with it, then that headache lifts and you feel lighter than ever. And you start to experience your own natural energy rather than that kind of highly caffeinated energy. And your own natural energy is always going to be better, isn't it? Now, I don't want to freak you out if you are thinking about starting some kind of self-work. It doesn't always happen like this. Sometimes it can be smooth sailing, depending on, what's on your plate and what you've got to deal with. But it's as well to be prepared and know that if you do have this kind of emotional setback, it's not only is it 100% okay, it's even expected if that happens to you. Here's another weird thing that can sometimes happen when you start to make progress with your stuff. It's almost as if you get more stuff to deal with. It's a bit it's a bit like the universe is kind of going, "Oh, really? Oh, you think so? Okay, right. Well, there you go. Deal with that. Try that." And it's not divine punishment. It's not like you're being tested. I think a lot of, spiritual folks like to think of it as a kind of universal test. I don't subscribe to that personally, although, it can sometimes feel like that. So, what is it actually? Why does that happen? What is going on there? Are we actually being tested by the universe or what? Well, let me give you some guidance. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this and you haven't already, hit subscribe or follow right now. That way you won't miss the next dose of real talk. Go on, do it now. Future you will thank you. So, like I say, no, it's not that the universe is testing you. The universe only really wants to support you. It's more that, for one thing, you've started to, dredge the bottom of the lake. And all that stagnant stuff that was buried has come up to the surface, and it can be pretty gross. It's also that you get kind of hyper aware of your emotional state and of the things that might propel you into a positive or a negative emotional state. So you become more vigilant about that kind of stuff and you notice it more. Your attention is in that area. And you know what they say, where attention goes, energy flows. So you can sometimes be more liable to be upset or more sensitive to some of the things that triggered you in the past. And like I say, it's totally normal and natural. And I don't want to say any of this to kind of daunt you, more to sort of forewarn you and reassure you that this is just how it goes. It always passes. In fact, there does seem to be a sort of general pattern or a journey that a lot of my clients experience. The ups and downs of working out their issues tends very broadly to follow a sort of pattern. And as I've said, healing is not linear. It's often a roller coaster of emotions. And I suppose it goes a little bit like this. So to begin with, you get this kind of initial high because, you've taken a positive step towards feeling better. You've done something loving and caring for yourself. And that feels really good just in and of itself. Then you've had a place to download and be heard, be understood, a place where you can say the stuff you've been afraid to say and know, hopefully, if you found the right practitioner, that you're not going to be judged for anything that you have to say. And so you get this kind of wonderful initial feeling of relief. And it is that. It is a huge relief and a release. And it's really, really important, even though it can sometimes be pretty challenging. Now, some people, because they have that initial good feeling and they feel better, they stop there and they think, right, great, I feel better, good, I'm off, thank you very much. And that, I believe, is a mistake. Instead, what happens if you stick with the process and you dig a little deeper and you start to, stir those stagnant waters, it can sometimes lead to a little bit of a dip mentally and emotionally, or just a feeling of being a bit more what's described as being emotionally labile. In other words, more prone to emotional ups and downs, highs and lows. And the fact is, it can be really hard to look at your issues and to start owning your part in the way that you feel, especially if you've been used to thinking in terms of blame. In other words, it's my fault. Oh shit, it's my fault that I feel like this. Of course it's not. It's not your fault. I think the fear of that thought is one of the things that keeps people from looking at their stuff, because they're afraid that they will find out that actually it's all their fault. And let me seriously reassure you on that score. It's your responsibility, but no, it's not your fault. And I'm going to talk more about blame and responsibility in another episode. But for now, just please take that as read. It is not your fault. It's hard to look at your stuff, and you might not feel ready. If it does start to get a bit challenging, you might want to just quit then and there. And you might prefer to go back to a time when your issues were a little bit easier to ignore. And I'm not going to sit here and judge you for that. That's a totally natural response. I came here to feel better and now I don't feel better. What the fuck? I understand if that makes you kind of want to go, no, thank you very much. But what happens if you are truly courageous and if you do stick with it? Then something really beautiful happens and you start to make some real headway, because then you start to have this kind of deeper understanding, a much more compassionate perspective about your stuff, not just compassionate about your responses, but more compassionate and more allowing about all the other people who are involved in your stories. You get these kind of wonderful breakthroughs, these sort of beautiful aha insight moments. And you begin to not only to understand, but to see things from a much broader perspective, which allows you to hold them in a less stressed out, emotional, reactive way. So this is the part of the process where you begin to feel a real sort of solid balance, a kind of equilibrium that lasts in between sessions. And it might be the first time that you felt like that in ages. This is what we call peace of mind. And it's absolutely fucking great. I just love seeing people go through their journey and their ups and downs and reach a place where they're doing it and they're feeling solid, feeling strong, feeling emotionally and physically stable. Oh, it's just wonderful. Now, what can then happen? Because remember I said healing is not linear. It's not a straight line from, ugh, I feel like shit to, yay, I feel great. If only. It's not. So what can happen then when you've really started to make progress and you've been living that way for a little while? Then that's when you get that weird thing of the universe sending you something that feels like a test. Thanks a fucking lot, universe. And you somehow find yourself feeling and responding in that old way again. And you might be saying to yourself, what the hell? I've worked on this. How come it's still affecting me? This isn't fair. And that's because, you've been used to feeling good most of the time. And so you may have developed a little bit of intolerance to negative emotions. You might find it harder to understand why you should ever be feeling bad when you've dealt with your stuff. And a friendly reminder, just because you dealt with your stuff, it doesn't mean that it's not going to trigger you. It just means that you might respond differently. You're likely to respond differently. It also never means that you aren't going to have so-called negative emotions, because you're not a robot. You're still a human being. Life is still going to be messy and awkward and uncomfortable at times. It's still going to throw you curveballs to deal with. And sometimes, you're not going to be as equipped as you were. You might be ill. You might be scared of something. You might, be caught on the back foot in some other way and have that old response. And that is absolutely okay, I promise you. Now, this is the stage when lots of folks might come back to the therapeutic process and they might feel quite disheartened. But there is no need to feel discouraged, because what happens eventually when you've spent enough time on this path, and I'm not talking years and years and years, I'm more likely talking, weeks and months, really. What happens when you stick with it for a bit of time is that you really develop this wonderful sense of forgiveness and compassion for yourself, for all your natural ups and downs, because you don't expect perfection or some kind of permanent glassy-eyed state of bliss. You recognize that all of these so-called positive, so-called negative emotions are just simply a part of being alive. And like with all things, as you get more practice at using the tools that you've learned along the way, every time you hit one of these speed bumps, you recover more quickly. You start to respond more thoughtfully, with curiosity, instead of just reacting in the moment. And sometimes you will still react in the moment, and that's okay too, because you'll probably afterwards go away and go, that was really interesting. Where did that come from? And you'll just start to respond to yourself with more kindness. And eventually, believe it or not, you even start to welcome difficulties. I know that sounds absolutely bananas, but it really does happen, because every time you get a difficulty or a challenge or some kind of life event that you wouldn't necessarily choose off the menu, you immediately start to recognize them for exactly what they are, which is opportunities for growth and learning. And God, I know that sounds trite, but I promise you that it is the case. You just got to trust me here and stick with it for long enough that you get to this stage. And when you're at that stage, you quit quitting. You stop giving up on yourself. You realize that, in actual fact, your healing is a lifelong journey. And you come to this really beautiful, peaceful place of acceptance within yourself. And that is true peace of mind, and it's the kind that lasts. So if you are up for a journey, and if you are up for a kind of lasting happiness, then I encourage you, I cheer you on as you gather up your courage and start the process. It may be tricky, but with the right support, I absolutely know that you will smash it. All right, my darling, lots of love. Until next time, see you soon. Drop. Thanks for listening to Rowdy and Real with me, Sophie Shaw. If you'd like to stay in touch, then please visit norwichtherapy.co.uk and join the mailing list to receive a gorgeous free meditation straight into your inbox. And if you'd like to chat with me about your stuff, then please book yourself a free 30-minute call at sophieshaw.as.me/free call, and we'll start making a plan for your happiness. This podcast is intended for educational and vaguely entertaining purposes and is not a replacement for counselling, psychotherapy or coaching. Please take responsibility for your mental health and ask for the help you need. You're fabulous and you deserve to be happy. Bye.